sitting around the pool, soaking up the rays. By Frederik Pohl. I had no way of telling how well the conference was going. None of us did. We didn't understand much of what was being said. And anyway, we didn't really know what the issues were in the first place. So the way I tried to judge it was by the amount of yelling. There had been a lot. My head hurt from that, and from not being allowed even a drink of water for 3.5 straight hours, and from a lot of other things too. So I came out of the Liliuokalani ballroom feeling poorly and looking worse, lifting each foot in turn in that circular howdy-doody prance my boss favors, and the Maui sun hit me right in the face. I blinked, I stumbled, and all of a sudden the boss whispered, "Later," and left me on my own. That's the way it always was. Take over without warning, and without warning, take off. So I had some slack time. The first thing I did, of course, was pee. You do that when you can, whenever you get a chance. You learn that right away. Then I headed for the pool. Mark Sokol was coming toward me. If I have a real friend among the bunch at the McKaylee Motel, male friend anyway, Mark is it. But he went by me without a word, slithering along like a mime doing serpents. There was no point in talking to him, and I didn't try. It was hot in the sun. There were 140 of us at the motel, but you'd never know it from the skimpy showing around the pool. When we're not working, we tend to run and hide somewhere, at least during the first few weeks. The McKaylee Motel is built on the side of a hill in the shape of a U, with big staggered rooms going down toward the ocean, and the wings of the building surrounding the palm trees and the pool and the sun deck and the winding carp stream and the kerosene flares they still light up with torches every sundown, beating out time on a drum as the beach boys race from flare to flare. Pretty much it's the way it was in civilian days, when tourists paid $160 a day for the rooms and lanais and more than that in the bar. Doesn't cost us a thing, especially the bar doesn't, since they closed it down. I was hoping to find Lois around the pool, but she was probably busy, or at least absent, so I sat down on a beach chair and threw my terry cloth robe off to catch some sun. The one thing I definitely expected to gain out of this was a tan. Alice leaned over in a predatory way and said, "How about it, Ben? You want to play some bridge?" Alice is a nice enough old lady, but she's over 70, and she didn't really look good in a deep-cut one-piece bathing suit. She is also someone I don't particularly want to play cards with. She's a professional card hustler, or was, took her retirement from the math department at Georgia Tech and went out to beat the blackjack dealers in Vegas. She did it very well, too, until she got recruited. So I turned her down, as she expected I would. She settled for backgammon with sad, sorry little Elsa McKee, our newest and unhappiest recruit. A shadow fell over me from behind. I jumped up and turned around and yelled, "Don't do that!" It wasn't anyone to worry about. It was just Arnold, who was one of our doctors. All he wanted was to check me out, but he should have known better than to startle me. "Sorry," he said. He probably was. "Just hold still." He stethoscoped me and pulsed me and pulled down one eyelid to look at the broken veins. "How are you feeling, Ben?" he asked. "Hungry," I said at random, and he nodded and snapped his fingers for a poolside waiter and told me I was all right. Shows how much he knows. Arnold doesn't really like us much. Neither do the waiters or the maids or the guards. When you come right down to it, I wouldn't even say we like ourselves a whole bunch. But of course, they're afraid to let anything go wrong with us. When the waiter rushed up to offer me the menu, the poor son of a bitch was trembling. The menu was about a yard tall and printed on what felt like plush. I tried to hold it so the sun glare didn't make me squint while I studied every item. It all looked very good. The thing I've noticed about my life is that I almost always get everything I want, but only when I either can't take advantage of it or don't want it anymore. This was a case of Category A. Before I was recruited, I was a tech manual compiler for an electronics company in Redondo Beach. $22,000 a year when I was working, which wasn't always, and a $90,000 mortgage to pay off. A big Saturday night date for me was Alaskan king crab's legs at the nearest Red Lobster Inn. And here the beach boy was handing me Mr. Lucullus's personal menu, pressed duck and mahi-mahi and chateaubriand, and all of it free. Free! We live like kings, we servants of the stars. Only I didn't know if I'd get a chance to eat it if I ordered it. So I asked what was ready right that minute. "Roast beef, mashed potatoes, salad," he said, without looking at me in the eye, afraid of what he might see. He was prepared to go on, but I said that would do, with a lot of fresh orange juice. The doctor looked up from tapping Elsa's sweet, skinny little knee and nodded approval. Arnold is always after us about vitamins. He convinced me he was right when Jack Marcantonio fell over right in the middle of a screaming session with another delegate in the sandalwood room. They had to take him away. Arnold told us later that he had been DOA at the hospital. Jack had been getting most of his calories from bourbon, and right after that they closed the Whaler bar. I dialed Lois's room on the poolside phone. No answer, so I leaned back to work on my tan, sort of hoping I would fall asleep. But across the pool, Walter and Felice were keeping me awake. And not Walter, Felice. They were stretched out on canvas mats, face down, lips almost touching, and Felice had a blue bikini on. Whenever I looked, I saw her bottom, and it kept me looking up every minute to see if Lois was coming, so we could take a quick dip in the pool and then go up to one of our rooms and forget what we were doing with our lives. One of the soldiers from the machine gun nest was staring at Felice, too. When he looked away and caught my eye, he glared at me, as though he were jealous of us pampered proxies. Jealous of us? He was a new man. By the end of the week, he wouldn't be jealous any more, if he lasted that long. He wasn't supposed to be looking our way. He was supposed to be guarding us against any evil-intentioned Earth patriots or guerrillas who might be trying to sneak in to interrupt our deliberations. And if the lieutenant caught him gazing at the girls, he would have been in trouble of his own. The funny thing was that the machine gunner wasn't looking at Elsa, who was a lot closer, and just about as naked. I guess a weeping woman was not the right kind of sex object. "Pay attention to your game," Alice scolded. But Elsa was not capable of that. You couldn't blame her. She had been on her honeymoon when she was recruited, and they wouldn't let her new husband come with her. Elsa is short, slim, pretty, very, very young. Her hair is short, too, muddy brown streaked with gold, and it flops around her head when she moves. I would bet that represented a $75 investment at the beauty parlor to get ready for the wedding, and now it was wasted on us. "Hell with it," said Alice, tipping the backgammon board so all the pieces slid to the end, and turning to me. "Ben, do you know what you were talking about today?" "The same thing. Minerals, radionuclides mostly. They're apeshit for that radioactive stuff." She nodded as though it meant something to her. Perhaps it did, but not to me. In those wheeling and dealing sessions, I understand only part of what is being said, even when it comes out of my own mouth. What do I know about curium or americium or carbon-14? This may be just as well. Sometimes I think the Earth patriots have the right idea. And if I really knew what the deals in the Lilio Kalani ballroom were about, I would be grabbing a gun and trying to storm the McKaylee Motel myself. If the boss let me, of course. Which, of course, he wouldn't. Elsa had stopped sobbing long enough to gaze mistily at the lobby door. "What's that?" she asked, the object of her question being 5 dilapidated people in clothes meant for Boston or Chicago, gaping apprehensively at the pool and the armed guards. The assistant manager of the motel was trying to soothe them, but not succeeding. "Congratulations, Elsa," I said. "You're now a senior member. That's what we all looked like when we got here. There's a new generation of recruits." It would have been an act of kindness to go up to them and welcome them and try to make them feel less trapped and hopeless. But why should I lie to them? Anyway, my lunch was arriving. Anyway, there were 2 members of our happy family walking toward them already, except that their errand was not welcoming. They were occupied. They were walking along together, clutching each other's hands and shouting in each other's ears. Alice scowled because they were making so much noise, and the waiter, coming toward me with my dinner, switched and took the long way around to avoid them. Their names were Greg and Julio. I said they were walking, but actually Greg was bouncy hopping like Peter Cottontail, and Julio was slinking like a two-legged cat, or like Groucho Marx. They were heading directly for one of those palm trees that looks like a green fright wig growing out of the top of an artichoke, and as they were not looking where they were going, Julio plowed right into it, head on, still talking. And he kept right on talking, while Greg jerked him back onto his feet, and they walked on, although Julio was beginning to bleed fairly heavily around the cheekbone. The new arrivals scattered despairingly and then disappeared back in the lobby. But I had my lunch to attend to. The orange juice was fresh and fine. The roast beef was good, too, although as the pool waiter was serving it, Alice suddenly jumped up, kicked over the backgammon board, and left for one of the motel's meeting rooms at a dead run, arms and legs windmilling wildly. The waiter dodged out of the way, his face blanching. Elsa gaped after her, and then lifted her face and howled, big tears sliding down her face. Then Elsa stood and ran in the opposite direction, back to her room. But there was nothing queer about her gait. It was Elsa doing it herself, just scared, sick, and despairing. And there I was, all alone by the $1 million pool, eating my $50 meal outside my $200 a day hotel room, and wondering if, after all, there was really anything wrong with suicide. It was a thought that had crossed my mind before. It had occurred to me, in fact, about every other minute since that minute when I turned off the 11 o'clock news, got into my pajamas, brushed my teeth in front of the bathroom mirror, and then, in an instant, saw that something else was looking out of my sleepy eyes. It was something I neither recognized nor knew what to do about, but I didn't have any choice. What I did for the next little while was not my own doing. I dialed an 800 number I hadn't known I knew. I put a coat on over the pajamas and waited about 5 minutes, not more, until a Long Beach ambulance pulled up at my door, and a jittery driver took me to a helicopter pad, then to LAX, then by jet to Hawaii, then here. I left a whole life back in Orange County. 3 girls I was dating, folk dancing every Thursday night, car payments, mortgage, an unfinished manual on a new pocket calculator, and the Sunday crossword puzzle left undone. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye, so my thoughts are often gloomy. But the brightener is Lois. I was fiddling with the last of the roast beef when I heard her call my name. I jumped up and she ran into my arms. Lois is not anything like any of the 3 women back in Orange County. I don't think I would have dated her there, not so much because she is black as because she is skinny, at least 10 years older than me, and not really all that pretty. But here on beautiful Maui, she has one big thing going for her. That was that when we made love, after we made love, she was the one to whom I could hold tight while we admitted to each other how bad we really felt. "Are you hungry?" I asked her. She gave me the answer just by the way she looked up at me, grinning, and I said, "Your place or mine?" I didn't have to ask that. I knew the answer. The answer was the nearest. With my free hand, I grabbed a couple of rolls for Lois in case she really was hungry, and we started off, arms around each other's waists. And then the boss whispered, "Now." That was that. I dropped the rolls. I stepped on them as I turned. I felt my knuckles bounce off Lois's elbow when she didn't get out of the way fast enough. But I didn't look at her. I was looking where I was heading in that fast and spastic marionette hustle all the way to the Liliuokalani ballroom. There's a book about a little boy named Curdy. I read it as a little kid. Curdy spent his time in the deep mines in, I guess, Germany or somewhere, being chased by weird-looking kobolds and gnomes and creepy, awful creatures of all kinds. The book scared me into 5-year-old nightmares. I did not at that time think I would ever be one of the gnomes. But that is what we all were, crawly and spastic, berserk or just bizarre. We moved the way our bosses moved. We writhed and wriggled, and we hissed at each other or screamed. I looked at my colleagues in the ballroom or the meeting rooms when we were settling shipment priorities or whatever it was we were doing. They were awful. So was I. I cannot tell you how grossly violated this makes you feel when some far-off boss takes over your body your mother lovingly hatched for you, and the mind you've filled with a million memories, and the mouth you have used to speak your heart. It isn't your heart that's speaking now. It's someone else's, or something else's, and most likely it's something that doesn't even have a heart back where it comes from, but turns out to be a cluster of heavy metal polyps on the slushy bottom of an ammonia sea, or a halogen jelly in some poison swamp. The other night, while Lois was having her once-a-day hysterics, she whimpered that it was like being raped by the 5th Armored Division, tanks and all. It isn't, though. It's worse. I suppose that in its time, the Liliuokalani Ballroom has had its share of weddings and corporate planning sessions and bar mitzvahs, or whatever they have on Maui that's like a bar mitzvah, and I bet every one of them was more fun than the bargaining sessions. You'd see the hotel people sneaking around, trying not to attract attention while they dusted off the tables and picked up the trash, and the worse than trash, because the sessions went on non-stop, all day, every day. It was about 3 in the afternoon when I bounced back into the bargaining session, but it would have been the same at midnight. I plunged right into the bargaining. That's how the boss does it. There aren't any introductions, just all of a sudden you're battling over which planet gets the next shipment of high-level military wastes, or who's willing to give up a load of spent fuel from a nuclear generating station if he can have the right to trawl the Atlantic Sea bottom for old ocean-dumped canisters, as if any of it was theirs to begin with. They say taking away all these dangerous radioactive wastes is actually a kindness to us on their part, because we've been worrying so much about how to deal with them. Their plan is simple. They ship them all to Borneo. Why Borneo? Because Borneo is on the equator, and that's where they're building their launch catapult, which will throw the cargoes into low Earth orbit, whereupon they will be packed into photon sail ships. And sooner or later, they will get to where one of the spacies wants them. When they talk to the human race in one of their occasional public statements, they're always pointing out that this is really awfully sweet of them. We don't have much they want, they say. The launch system they're building is very expensive, though the Earth governments are paying for it. The only reason they're doing it in the first place, they tell us, is that they just want to give us a hand, to speed up our intellectual and technological advancement so we can be as good as they are. Maybe so. They're not in any hurry about it, though. Some of those cargoes aren't going to get there for 1,000 years, because photon sail ships aren't very fast. They don't care. They have plenty of time. And they tell us that by the time the cargoes start arriving, we pitiful human beings will be educated up to their standard. And then we can join the Galactic Club. Oh, frabjous day! Oh, time of great joy for the world! Then the trade will be two-way. Then they'll send us just shiploads and shiploads of the most marvelous and technologically advanced gadgets. I imagine that's what Captain Bligh told the Tahitians when he swiped their breadfruit. On the other hand, so my friend Mark says, you have to admit the Spaceys did us a kind of favor at that. The old Earth was really scaring itself to death. 50,000 nuclear warheads pointed at 50,000 others, and all of them on a short fuse. There was a 3-way summit conference going on in Geneva when the first Spaceys began grabbing off human beings to be their slaves. It wasn't going well either, and I think every one of us breathed a sigh of relief when the Americans and Russians and Chinese issued a joint communique, the first they'd ever agreed on, to say that in view of the extraordinary circumstances, meaning the Spaceys, they were going to recess the meetings without prejudice, meaning they would take their fingers off the triggers, at least for a minute. So I guess in a way we poor puppets are a big help to the human race. Our own governments tell us we are. They say we are VIPs squared, although you don't feel very important when you're in one of those meetings and see yourself trying to emphasize a point by shaking or waving and uncoiling a member you don't have, although you'd be surprised how close you can come. But they say we do big work. They say that because the travel times are so long, there's no way at all for these star-born creatures to come in person to our miserable little out-of-the-way planet. So if we want poor primitive Earth to play any part at all in the great galactic congeries of cultures, they have to do it the only way they can. Telepathically. Not exactly telepathically, but by thought beefed up by some sort of amplifying technology that lets them reach out millions of times faster than light into the minds of such handy appliances as Lois and Elsa and me, so that we can be their eyes and arms and voices. The word is possessed. There really are demons, only they come from places like Fomalhaut and Alpha Centauri, and they don't want our souls. All they want is our radionuclides, and the frail and frantic bodies of people like me to puppet, so they can squawk and scream at each other as they confer to divide up the loot. So they say we matter, we miserable puppets on Hawaii's golden island. They say we're so terribly important that all the resources of the civilized world are at our disposal to protect us. We've never asked for them, though. They surround us with machine guns and patrol the air overhead with F-15s and Foxbats so that no wild-eyed Earth patriot can break in to interrupt our galactic deliberations. Big deal. Oh, biggest of all deals ever. I do not deserve such an honor. I've got my faults, but that wicked I have never been. And that's the way it was with us. Until, suddenly, one morning, it wasn't. I'd had a really good night's sleep, the first in ages. I woke ravenous and rested. Fruit and rolls and orange juice in a bowl of ice and hot coffee in a thermos were set out on the lanai, the way they were every morning, and I stretched and yawned and gloried to myself in the fact that I'd been left alone for, what was it? Had to be 10 hours or more. Hot sun beat down on me as I swallowed the juice and poured the coffee. There was an unusual number of us poor captives down in the gardens. I saw Alice standing by the carp pool, just as she caught sight of me up on the lanai. "Come down," she called. "Hurry up, come on, Ben, now." I was feeling too good to be playing cards. "I'm not interested in playing bridge right now," I called back, surveying the people on the chance that Lois, too, had time off, and Alice cackled, "Bridge? Who said anything about bridge? Wake up and smell the coffee cooking, you idiot. Don't you know they've gone?" Well, they weren't really gone, of course, because in any tangible physical sense, they'd never been there. But what Alice meant was unbelievably true. The insides of all our heads were vacated by the squatters. Our bodies had been returned to us. The endless, squawking, bickering conferences to split up the spoils of Earth were permanently adjourned. Not just in Hawaii, not just for the moment, but all over the Earth, and lastingly. Left us stranded and confused. Oh, glad about it, sure. But none of us had expected so instant a reprieve. Neither us unlucky subjects, nor our masters who owned the machine guns. 90 minutes after the last straggle of alien-run humans abandoned their cawing and screeching at each other in the Liliuokalani room, the 5 power commandants were there, arguing about what to do with us. Let us go home? Oh, hell no, not a chance. The Spaceys might come back. No, sir, we guests would just have to go on being guests until somebody could figure out just what was going on, whenever that might be. If the 5 military commandants were confused, it was because their governments were even more confused than they were. There had been no warning at all. The Spaceys just left. The possessed engineers at the launch facility in Borneo were as abandoned as we. We were the representatives in the capitals of the major powers. So was the whole Earth. They didn't even say goodbye. On the other hand, being confined to the Paradise Islands of the Pacific wasn't really all that bad, once we began to believe we were going to be allowed to finish a kiss we started, or be there to eat an ordered meal. You could say it was pretty neat, in fact. We swam in the surf of the pool, we rode the bridle paths up the slopes of Haleakala, we learned snorkeling and windsurfing, and they even opened the bars again. In the case of Lois and me, what we did a lot of was try to figure out what to do about us. See, we'd never met until we were both drafted, without consent or option. And while we had come to treasure each other very much, there was a real question about how well we'd fit into each other's lives on a long-term basis. By the end of the first day, I had agreed that the age thing didn't matter. On the second, Lois conceded that neither really did color. Where we were hung up mostly was on the fact that she didn't want to live in Orange County, and I didn't think I could get a job back in her hometown, which was Philadelphia. After we batted it back and forth for a while without progress, we finally went to arbitration. The only arbitration available was our mutual friend, Mark Sokol. We found him in the Whaler Bar, drinking Mai Tais and smoking $2 cigars, with a fresh white orchid lei round his neck. There was a noisy end of the bar, where Elsa's friends were having a welcoming party for her bridegroom, just allowed to fly in, and a quiet end, where the TV set was on with the picture bright but the sound down, showing some satellite remote from some place like Geneva, and no one watching it. Mark was at the quiet end. He had taken a whole table to spread out yellow-ruled pads and neatly sharpened pencils. We caught him in the throes of literary composition. When he looked up, sucking on the end of a pencil, he scowled at us for a moment before he noticed who we were. "Ah, my children," he said genially. "Got everything straightened out?" "No. What's the matter?" And when we told him what was the matter, he scoffed. "Job? What are you worrying about a job for, Ben? You're fixed for life after you write your book." That was a new one on me. "What book?" "Your personal experience book. I was a prisoner of the star creatures. Only you can't use that title because it's mine." "That's really dumb, Mark," said Lois. "There's dozens of us could write that same book. How many do you think people are going to read?" "Right," he cried, lifting his Mai Tai to her. "Exactly. That's why you want to get in first. Last night I sneaked over to the airport and cabled 6 New York literary agents. The first one that promises me $500,000 in advance gets my business. The second one you can have. Now," he said, putting down his drink and picking up his cigar, "we've got to have some ground rules. Your personal story's your own, that's for sure. You do a sort of autobiography leading up to the day you were taken. Then you describe how it felt to be possessed like we were, what your particular boss was like." "I don't know if I want to think about that," said Lois, licking her lips. "Up to you," shrugged Mark. "It's good catharsis, but if you don't want to... Anyway, then we come to the interpretive part." "What interpretive part?" I asked. "When you explain what you think the Spaceys were really doing," he said, and he waved me quiet when I started to object. "I know we don't really know any of that, but then nobody else in the world does either. So who are they going to want to hear guesses from if not from us? That's where we have to be careful. I'll tell you my theory, but you can't use it. You have to make up your own. My idea is that the Spaceys didn't really know much about the Earth until they started taking people over. Then they were disappointed. And what they really want is radioactive materials, and we just didn't have enough to justify all their effort. Pay attention, Lois," he ordered crossly. "It's important we don't use the same stuff." But she wasn't listening. She was looking past him and over his head at the silent TV screen. When I saw what she was gaping at, I stared too. It was the Geneva meeting, and the face of an announcer in the foreground was whispering into a microphone while limousines behind her were pulling up and disgorging their occupants. I don't remember jumping up. All of a sudden, there I was, with the audio gain knob in my hand, and the announcer's voice was telling us in hushed tones that this was the resumed summit session. "I guess you were right, Mark," I said, staring at the screen. "I guess we just didn't have enough radioactive wastes to satisfy him." He turned irritably, and then squawked as he saw what we were seeing. The Russian delegate hopping out of his car in a terribly familiar bunny-jump way, the Chinese slithering, the American walking as though on stilts, getting ready to enter the conference that would decide whether to put off Armageddon for a while yet, or produce enough radioactive wastes to satisfy any demand at all.